Hello, and welcome back to the final session of the final day of Collaborate Virtual. Big thank you to all of our speakers. It's been a fantastic week with talks on accessibility, UX design, and all the focus on collaboration and team design. Also, a massive thank you to our sponsors, CX by Design and Balsamic, and of course, everyone that's tuned in to watch the sessions. Up now, we've got a session I'm really excited about, a discussion on inclusion, equity and diversity in collaboration with Dr. Gyles Morrison, a clinical UX specialist and digital health consultant, improving the usability, accessibility and fun people have with healthcare technology, and Allison Huang, experienced designer, researcher and strategist with a commitment to equity. And this session will be moderated by Nomensa's CEO and founder, Simon Norris. As always, please say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure your chat settings are switched to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there's any issues with the stream. We are using auto-generated captions for this session. Whilst they might not be 100% accurate live, when we share these talks publicly, we will ensure that the transcripts are 100% accurate. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to Simon, Allison and Gyles.
Great, thanks, Henry, and welcome everyone to the final session of Collaborate Virtual 21. I'm really excited about this session today because we're going to talk about a subject that I think is at the very heart of how we collaborate well. And as we go forward, it's going to be something that we're going to need to think about more and cultivate more effectively. I'm joined by two UX folks, both working within the health sector. Allison stateside, working for a little company that just deals with 65 million people. And we have Gyles, who is a kind of doctor that's now practicing a clinical UXer that's kind of been trained by our very proud NHS. So this is a really interesting time. So I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of an overview about those guys. I'm going to kind of just dive straight into the questions because I've got a few that I want to ask, and I want to make sure that we can get through them all. But yeah, so let's just begin. So how do we each define diversity, equity and inclusion? Why are these topics important to us? And I want Gyles to sort of start off with that, please, sir.
Yeah, there's loads of definitions for these sort of titles, and I find it can be a bit overwhelming how complicated it's made. To me, really, it's ultimately about embracing the differences that we have amongst humans. We're all unified in being humans, but our differences is what gives us such a wealth of experiences that we can face. And so ultimately, to me, diversity, equity and inclusion is about embracing all the differences that we have within our species, at work in particular. I think we can look at it in a personal life, but I find that this is, and there are issues where that's not explored in a personal life, but for sure, a lot of times we're focusing more on the work environment. And I'm quite excited to talk more about my thoughts on how when we don't actually get this right, what problems that's causing and how that's even affected me and my professional journey.
That's great. I really like the use of the word species there as well. It kind of positions it in the right way. We're going to come back to the use of that word. I love that. Allison, what's your perspective in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion? How's it important to you from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess. Well, let me start with the second question first, perhaps. I mean, by way of introduction, my name is Allison. I use she, her pronouns. And I am a Taiwanese and Cantonese American woman currently based in Boston, Massachusetts. This, I don't know, that's how I identify, means a lot of things. But I think for me, diversity, equity, and inclusion became really important for me when around the time of Michael Brown's shooting in 2014, what that was 7 years ago now, that was right around the time when I began, thinking more about how I identify as an Asian American person and trying to think about how I can begin to navigate and place myself in the kind of racial tension and structural racism that we experience in the United States today. And that's kind of how I became interested in the topic. So to me, diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity is not only about race and gender and sexuality as, we might typically kind of understand it to be in the workspace. I think it's also, as we were saying, it's all the differences that we bring to the table. It might be educational background, it might be our lived experiences, it might be our age or our personality or our culture. But to me, diversity is all about like what we each bring to the table and what makes those things different. I think equity considers that diversity and recognizes that because of that, each of us need like different sorts of resources, supports, opportunities in order to like be our best self or contribute in a way where we feel valued, especially in a professional workplace. And I think kind of building on that, inclusion ensures that people, diverse people, since we're all, different in many, many ways, are invited, they're welcomed, valued, even hopefully feeling confident and comfortable in, sticking to their own personal values, goals, beliefs, thought processes within a workplace or work environment, specifically related to collaboration, I think, as it kind of relates to today's topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a number of areas there that are essential. I think I just kind of want to pick up on the idea around valued, because I think that things are slightly different today, especially in the kind of 21st century. I think that there's a zeitgeist around the importance that we place on valuing each other. And I definitely think that has been heightened by this awful pandemic that we've all gone through. It's weird to say even that we've all gone through, and this is a truth, right? It's not just Europe or Asia, it's global. We have all gone through this. And I think this sense of how we're valued is something that I think is much more prevalent and obvious than it has been before. It's almost though we need to be valued, and I think we should be valued, because at the heart of that is this idea of purpose, to have autonomy in our lives and in our work, and to gain mastery over those aspects of our work and our life. And I think these things are kind of so deeply intertwined now that I think if you would have gone back 25 years, the idea of being valued would have been seen as something quite twee, or almost how would you do that? As whereas today, you fast forward to right now, I think it's essential, to be valued, to feel valued in our work. So, the reason I'm saying that is, do you think that being valued in your work is important for you as it is for other people to see that you're valued? Does that make sense?
That is making sense. I think for me, what's quite tricky, and for those that identify as Black, Afro-Caribbean, African American who's listening, it's very common for us to be taught from a young age, almost universally, that you have to work harder than your white peers in order to succeed. Like, even if you're clearly more intelligent, more capable, more skilled, more qualified, you will still need to prove your worth a bit more. and you're conditioned into that. Even as an adult, you then face a lot of situations where subjectively you're proven that that's true, and then objectively you're proven that that's true. So I think with that, that does tie in with that value piece, is that whether it's through the interview process, whether you've just been newly hired or you've been in a company for years, with new colleagues or people you've worked with for a long time, there can still be that belief that actually you need to show your value, prove your worth. So, and have people give you that very clear feedback that you are valued, you're trusted, you're respected, more so than potentially other people of different skin colors or disabilities or anything that's going to make someone feel othered. I think there is a lot of times where when you are not conforming to white, middle class, middle-aged person or young person even, actually you are going to feel like you have to get that validation that you're valued more. That's been my experience. It's been an experience that a lot of my peers that are otherwise Black or people of color have shared with me as well. Quite keen, what have been for you as well then, Allison?
Yeah, I think a few things that are coming up for me. Number one, I don't know if this is universal or if this is just me, but I have a hard time separating my own perception of my own value from, the communications that I receive about whether or not my work is valuable or my participation is valuable or even my mere presence is valuable. I think for me, that's like that back and forth with my community or my colleagues, my coworkers is like crucial for me to feel like I am valued in a workplace. I think a few other things that are coming up for me, there's the whole idea around giving and receiving credit for work. Just like a simple acknowledgement, like, okay, well, thank you, Gyles. That was like a great idea. We're going to explore that and build upon that. Even a like verbal acknowledgement, or maybe it's an email. Like something that I have found to be really valuable for myself in feeling valued is like just starting an Outlook folder where I can save all the emails I've received that are like praiseworthy, or any screenshots that I have from like Teams messages and whatnot, where somebody says, "Oh, you did a great job," or "Oh, I found that question to be super interesting. Let me think about that some more." Again, that has to do with, my self-perception of value, perhaps sometimes relying too much on what other people think, but, I think that's something that is ingrained within me and probably a lot of other people as well. And then the final thing that was coming up for me as you both were speaking was about kind of this might be a little bit cringy or gross, but like the monetary value of your work. Like how are you being compensated for your work, and how does that compare to how your colleagues are being compensated? How can we think about equity and worth in those terms to ensure that, like pay gaps are being closed, that people are, transparent around the value that each of you might bring to a particular team or company or organization.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that kind of moves how we measure value, in quite different ways. So and important ways as well. I think this whole point around value, that we face, and I like what you said, Allison. It's interesting that for some people that I speak with, how can it not be about that? But then for other people, they're kind of, but it's often not about that. It's like a really fine line, a dichotomy. It's something that we know that is important, but do we give it enough visibility, enough credit? Do we talk about it? And I think at the heart of that idea of, being able to value ourselves and being able to value the contribution of others is that kind of deeper idea that allows us to be authentic, things that really drive kind of positive collaboration, both in teamwork and in individual collaboration as well. So that's kind of the reason why I'm bringing it up. For me, this idea of valuing other people, letting them know, to your point, that they're acknowledged, and that they're recognized, is important. I mean, I haven't had to think about what you said, Gyles, where, regardless if you're smarter or something like that, because I am unfortunately a white middle-class male. So, I don't know what the receiving end of that is, but I'm smart enough to realize, well, actually, that's something that we don't want to value because it devalues us. That's the reason why I'm bringing that idea up. So it's kind of, we're moving towards this point where we're starting to recognize diversity as a value. Of course, it's a value. I mean, to your word around species, but it's becoming something that we're able to talk about with people starting to be more open, less threatened. I mean, I'm not saying that we're there by any means, but I'm saying the fact that these conversations now are happening, I'm hoping means that more value appreciation and therefore diversity and good collaboration can only come from that way of thinking.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, because there's so many labels I can have, right? Heterosexual, Christian, husband, son, brother. Afropean is one that my wife has got me onto. The fact that, even though my family historically are from the Caribbean, if you want to go even further back, it's going to be African, but I'm uniquely European because I was born and raised in the UK. And I think the experience of being Black in the UK is vastly different to being Black in the US. In fact, I would even argue now that I'm living in Germany, it's vastly different to being Black in mainland Europe, because my main language is English. I speak very little German, even though I live here now. So all these different things can, at times, allow me to just feel like I just fit in somewhere. And other times, those labels or ways that I self-identify actually then makes me feel like I can't be myself. I actually have to hold back. And worse, building on this topic of value, it can be a time where, because of that label, am I actually showing myself to be of benefit here? Am I actually really of value? It could be something as simple as, well, my wife does a lot of coaching and counseling for women of color. Can I really help her give advice as a Black man? I'm Black, but I'm not a woman. So, I do a lot of coaching, but, but then it can even come into the workplace where I'm a doctor doing UX work. Sure, it should be actually quite advantageous to the whole team with me being a medical professional doing UX work on a healthcare product, especially if it's aimed at clinicians or patients directly. But then there can be other times where, well, if I'm the only Black person here and there's other people who've been in the field a bit longer than me, even though I'm a doctor and I've been in this field for 7 years and I've been, a thought leader on the space, maybe I still have something to prove. And it can go into the sphere of imposter syndrome, really, where do you actually accept the facts about your knowledge, your skill, what you bring to the table? Are you actually accepting that you do have value? Are you actually accepting a wealth of evidence to prove that you're fine where you're at? So yeah, it's challenging even to this day, and I don't know if I will be able to fully rid myself of some of those times when I do second guess myself and question whether actually I've got something more to prove. Which is bittersweet, I think in one breath, it's like, well, continuous improvement, being self-aware. Another part is perhaps the environment and the people I'm working with at times is forcing me to challenge and devalue myself sometimes, not recognize my own value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
a challenge. Allison, sorry.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Gyles, for sharing that. I can relate with some aspects of what you're saying, the imposter syndrome feeling, the not knowing if, like, hey, I have these experiences under my belt. I have used these tools, or I learned these methods. I have these things to contribute, but questioning, on the spot, like, is this actually, am I actually good at this? Am I worth this? And I think, to me, something I've started to think about, which point for conversation, perhaps not necessarily a stake in the ground point of view here, but what does this have to do with existing power structures or privilege? Like, who comes in assuming that they have value, and who comes in like feeling comfortable, like faking it until they make it, and who might not come into those spaces feeling that way? And how might we, as collaborators, as teammates, as even like new hired design buddies, as we call them at Athena Health, how might we, who maybe feel a bit more established, allow and empower those who are joining anew, or may feel less, more impostery, say? How might we empower them to like feel more value? And how might we also ask those who are in power to, examine how they come to the table, and how we might collectively build a space where, we can acknowledge that some people come in feeling differently confident, or differently comfortable, or differently valued, and how might we together create a space where we start closing some of those gaps?
Yeah, really, really good points. That's kind of just, that's going to bring me beautifully on to my next question here. But I'm just going to say something to you as a 52-year-old person. Imposter syndrome is a sign of expertise. If you don't feel it, that's worrying. I feel it every day in many ways. It's kind of, it's what inspires me to continue mastering things that I'm not good at, and things that I think I have some skill over. So I think imposter syndrome is definitely something that kind of lets you know that, that you've got perspective and value and consideration of others. It's not a negative thing. So I kind of, I'd be worried if someone's told me that they didn't have it. I would be, crikey, you must be a psychopath then. So, we're all, we should all have a sense of our limitations. And that's the point about collaboration, isn't it? Because it's not about our own limitations. It's, if you think, when we accept what we're good or what we're bad at, we then have this greater idea of thinking, well, actually, what are other people good at? What are other people bad at? And it's not then so much about what we're not so good at, because we are well compensated by the skill and expertise of others. And this is the point of collaboration. So it takes away this idea of that person's good at this and this person's not good at that. It's more a sense of, well, actually, here's a whole bunch of abilities or capabilities. How do we choreograph them in a certain way to deliver or solve certain problems or provide value in certain situations, which I think is, kind of the point of collaborating. I don't need to be brilliant at everything, because I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by people that are more brilliant than me. It's kind of, to quote Newton, collaboration lets you stand on the shoulders of everyone else. Like those castellas they do, where the people stand up. It's kind of cool like that. You get to have expertise that other people don't have. I've got that from my conversations with you, Gyles, from thinking about clinical UX in that way, from thinking, wow, I've learned a lot from you just being able to think in that kind of way. So it's, this is what I mean. There is no weakness. There's only an opportunity for growth and mastery. But imposter syndrome, it's like the shadow. I don't want to sound so negative, but right. So question, how might we shape inclusive collaboration? And I'm thinking about, these are the moments, the spaces, the kind of people dynamics. I mean, how can we shape inclusive collaboration for diverse teams? Allison.
Sure. a couple thoughts come up as usual. My brain goes in many directions all the time. First is more of a general approach to how we might build these for each individual team, because I do believe that each individual team has its own culture, its own dynamics, and needs to be kind of designed for in sort of like one-off ad hoc basis, like tailoring a space or a moment for a specific group. One piece of advice I've heard in the past, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but it was, to think about taking a human-centered design or design thinking approach to building a team culture, like understanding the people, taking time to build relationships, designing solutions to try out, and, treating that as a sort of test and learn cycle to, like, is this working for you? Is this not? How might we do this better next time? There's an organization that I follow. They're called Creative Reaction Lab. They're based out of St. Louis, Missouri. I love them. They're great. You should check them out. But they frame up an approach to human-centered design that they call equity-centered community design. And it adds lenses to the traditional like double diamond approach of like building humility and acknowledging and dismantling power constructs, examining the histories that are involved in allowing for healing. And I think adding these lenses specifically on top of a design thinking approach to forming team culture, to building collaborative spaces can, I believe, like help our teams be more introspective in terms of like, okay, what's happening now? Who feels valued? Who doesn't? Or when do some people feel valued or differently able to contribute thoughts or participate actively? And how might we start to, shift the dynamics so that people do feel like, they can contribute? I think one specific thing that comes up for me in particular, I tend to be more of a person who likes to write things down and like process internally before speaking out loud. So something like this discussion is, it's fun for me and a challenge. But something that I personally love is just like, okay, after you ask a big question or give somebody a prompt, like give people time to think, jot down their notes. Classic like design thinking sticky note activities. Like I love that stuff, that idea of like allowing people to go internal before sharing. I think it both, helps people avoid sort of like groupthink issue. It helps people kind of flatten the, flatten any hierarchies. So, if we're all just sticking our sticky notes up on the wall and stepping back and looking around, it kind of takes out the, the hippo effect of like who's the highest powered person in the room. It allows for a little bit more of the flattening of the playing field. That's the phrase I was looking for. Little things like that in terms of like how we facilitate conversations or how we moderate sessions, to me, can make sure that everybody's feeling valued, and or at least start to get in that direction. And then again, like taking a reflective moment at the end to think about like, okay, give everybody a chance to maybe jot down a couple notes or write some feedback about like, hey, I felt this way about the way that we did this exercise, or here's how I think we might change this conversation so that more people are empowered to come to this ready to participate.
Wow, brilliant.
Yeah, I just to build on what you've said, Allison, there's a few ideas that I have consideration. So first and foremost, like you've alluded to, you've got to get the insights from people about what they're comfortable with. Because it could just be that they're just not ready to talk about certain things, that they're not comfortable, they don't know how to broach the topic. And so there's a time and a place to have that as private conversations through one-to-ones, as well as more open discussions, which it's really important that it's clear that it's a safe place to have those discussions. And it can't be lip service when you say safe place. I've faced that in my career where people say this is a safe place, like the work environment is a safe place. you speak up about stuff and the managers are calling you to tell you that you've said stuff inappropriately, we're not really happy about you talking about stuff, like trying to control you. And I'm like, this is not a safe space. Or worse, when you say it's not a safe space and then they're like, oh, well, of course it is. As probably the people who are the most privileged, not just regardless of race, but they are the boss. Like, how can they? So yeah, points made. So that's the first thing really, is just to make sure that people can speak freely about what they are or are not comfortable with, and get from them actually what does change look like. And the next step is that, armed with knowledge from that, be it the one-to-ones or more open discussions, is then to put what you've learned into practice. If you know there's certain people who just need a prompt to speak up, so if you actually ask them to speak up about something and you know that they're okay with that, then give it a go. You know, try it out. If there's other people who are a bit too vocal, shut them down. You know, if there are topics not being covered, but you know people want to talk about it, broach the topic with everybody. And I think the third thing then, building on that, is then recognizing that this is a process that takes time. And that time can be weeks, can be months, sometimes it can be years. It really depends on what the starting point is. If it's loads of new people coming together, then it could be done a bit quicker. But if there has historically been a hierarchy there, where there has been very difficult, challenging egos to deal with at times, then that could take a lot longer. You might even need to have outside input. But and I think that outside input is something that we need to be open to as well. That, you know, this is a problem and none of us are really capable of just doing on our own. And it's normally fine in so many other settings. If you're really sick, you need surgery, you're not asking the neighbor to go and come with, you know, kitchen knife and sort you out. You're going to go to the hospital, get a surgeon. If something wrong with your car, you go to a mechanic. If you actually don't know how to deal with DEI issues, you get someone who does to come and provide some input. So that's my thoughts on this.
No, great. I mean, both of you. I mean, just that the you know, the whole answer and contribution there was just loaded, absolutely loaded with knowledge. And, you know, just to summarize it, I think, yeah, insight, you know, increasing awareness, of ourselves, and then I think B, of the groups that we operate in, and then C, thinking about, well, actually, what are we missing? You know, which is, I think, the point of kind of looking external. You know, what is it that we can't see or we don't understand? And you know, again, and I think that goes back to that idea that I was talking about, this sense of what we value. You know, we value ourselves more and more now. So it's kind of the antithesis, isn't it? If you don't value yourself so much, you will be more closed down. Of course, you're bound to say everything's great if you're the one in control. Whereas what we'd value more, and what's often more refreshing, is when when someone recognizes, well, actually, they might not have all the answers. They don't really know, because that invites contribution, that demonstrates and acknowledges others. And I think that then gets at this idea around collaboration and diversity. And I suppose what we're talking about is sort of diversity of thought. Yeah, kind of, I'm not going to go on because I've got another question to ask you, but it always reminds me of, you know, every time that I read more and more about the genius that was Herbert Simon, and this kind of concept that he came up with around bounded rationality. You know, everything that we think is kind of bounded. You know, our goal is to increase that boundary, increase that diversity, because it increases us. I mean, that's the way I think about it. That's why I liked the use of the word species, because it's kind of, it's no longer a group, a set of people, or a culture. It's humans. It's at the highest level of what it is to be a human, which I think is all of us, according to many different measures. So no, there's loads and loads in what you said there. And I've never heard that said before. The kind of, Hippo said like that. We normally say the highest paid person in the room, but I've not heard it said with the use of the word power. That's really, this is the point of these conversations, right? That's just up my knowledge, up my game. This is the point. This is the whole, this is why we do these things, right? That's cool. So if you had to think about tools that we could use that would potentially reshape the way that we collaborate or can collaborate, whether it's in teams or with stakeholders, what kind of tools come to mind? And that could be tools that we're thinking about that we use day to day, or tools that we think might be potentially good in the future. Yeah. Gyles?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I think tools, so it's not obviously like a physical tool, it's like anything that you could be using to help solve this problem. To me, there's nothing really better than finding a way that allows you to connect to someone on a human level. So as crazy as it may sound and as difficult as it can be during a pandemic, everybody has to eat, like regardless of cultural differences, sexual differences, religious differences. Like everyone eats, loves to have a great meal. So I find that people tend to open up a lot when you can be at a social gathering that involves food. And this happens in the workplace. People congregate in the canteen, and I think this is the sort of thing that we need a bit more often at work. I think this has evolved over time. Like I'm in my 30s, so my working life has been of very recent times. But I get the impression that over the last even 30, 40 years, people tend to be a bit more social at work over time. And I think this is helping to allow these conversations to be a bit more normalized. Unfortunately, I think it's also been because of us having a lot of press about tragedies, George Floyd's murder coming to mind in particular. But I think it's when people are able to just connect on a much more human level. So I'm not saying that you have to now suddenly become best friends with every single one of your colleagues and they've come to your wedding and they're sleeping over slumber parties. Like, it doesn't have to get that deep. But it's that you can actually just be a bit more open and free, because a common thing, for example, right, unless I tell someone who isn't Black in Germany that I don't feel like I can be a Black man in Germany, and the reasons why. So for example, I can't get plantain. I have to make my own jerk seasoning from scratch. I normally would buy it from a jar. I can make it from scratch, but I'll normally buy it from a jar when I was in the UK. I'm not going to listen to my music outside, as in like, I'm not going to hear someone else play music, African Caribbean music that I regularly listen to. I'm not going to stumble across someone playing that. Like, it's not impossible, but the chances are very, very slim. So me just being the way I was in the UK is partly for the fact that I'm not around the community that I used to be around, but also it's easy to be very racially isolated in certain parts of Germany. Same in the UK, but definitely where I'm in Germany. And when I explain what that looks like practically, so for example, my wife, dealing with hair and beauty products, she has to buy it online. There's very few shops she can just go into. But then you talk to the average German, you want to have schnitzel, whether it's a ready-made schnitzel, whether it's the meat ready-made or vegan version, and you bread it yourself, whether it's certain music, it's Oktoberfest, you want to prepare for, and you can go into so many shops and people know exactly what you want and you can be served. I have to explain that to somebody. And it's easier to have those conversations normally it's in a much more social setting, rather than it's at, canteen, we've got half an hour because it's been busy, we've got loads of meetings and you rush and you probably never cover the topic. But you actually have gatherings during working hours if it's a work time thing as well, by the way. I don't think it's fair to force people to come out on a weekend for a work-based gathering. If it's fully paid for, then that helps to incentivize, but normally I think working hours. But it's those social gatherings where people just are free to talk about what they do in family gathering. Like if it's Christmas time and you've had a Christmas party and you're like, what's Christmas like for you? And you speak more and then people start learning more about what it means to be you, because you're able to talk about it in a much more comfortable setting, which again builds on this topic of we need a safe place. I find that when you say we're going to have a meeting at this time, it's specifically about talking about DEI at work, people can clam up, they can already get their back up, they don't know what to say, or others, especially myself, where I label myself as, consciously anti-racist. It's like, I'm willing to go for those meetings. I will be vocal. And sometimes it can be a bit exhausting, but I really feel motivated to do that. But you can suddenly break down barriers and just allow it to be more of a natural extension of what you would normally be saying or doing when it's in a more social setting. So I think social settings for conversations is the tool that I would love to utilize more often. Pandemic permitting.
Social tools. Interesting. Allison?
Yeah. Well, first of all, +1 or +100 to Gyles' comments about meals. Always down to eat a meal with somebody, especially during working hours if it's fully paid for. I think, yeah, meals or even just like a coffee or tea break, a walk and talk. Definitely that sort of space that's, if possible, if you can do it outside the office and take those walls away from like, we're in this office, I'm a boss. Maybe just, go if there's a coffee shop down the street or something. That's something that actually one of my earlier managers when I was an intern did a couple times where it was just like, let's take this one-on-one to the coffee shop down the street. I'll spot you. And that ability to, have something to fiddle with, have something to look at, and also bond over something that isn't specifically like, well, how's your project going? What are your career goals? That really felt that to me helped me feel a lot more comfortable with her. It's just like a human, which I think is honestly a lot of what this conversation is really revolving around. It's like, how do we learn to see each individual as like a human, and how do we acknowledge the differences between us and help build each other up? A couple other ideas that came up for me. I know not everybody loves these, but something that I found valuable are like finding your people at a job. So whether they're like an employee resource group or you're able to connect with somebody, maybe it was just a coffee that you had when you were first hired or something. Or maybe you have a sort of mentor assigned to you who's not specifically your like everyday manager. They're not the ones giving your performance ratings or something, but you have somebody you can go to just to have social time or check in on how you're feeling. Somebody or a group of somebodies that you can go to say like, hey, I'm feeling safe in these ways. I'm feeling unsafe in these places. I'm feeling confident in these ways. I'm feeling shaky in these other places. A place outside potentially of traditional management structures to kind of make those voices or make those concerns and thoughts known. Maybe there's also mechanisms like team surveys is something that I've participated in before, where somebody like anonymizes all the responses. The team like puts in all these answers to like, do you feel like you can be your best self at work? What might allow you to feel that way? Or what should our leadership team invest in to make sure that, we all feel confident and comfortable and valued in the things that we do? And how might a leadership team use a survey or in a round of interviews or diary studies or any of your traditional like UX research methods to do some discovery on their own team and figure out what gaps exist and how they might start testing some concepts and solutions to moving the needle on that front. Yeah, and I think also, what you said before, Gyles, around like bringing in experts when you need to, like if you need to, don't be afraid to invest in that. I think those experts are going to be the ones who, for people like me and Gyles potentially, who will be like the very noisy ones in the anti-racism trainings. They'll know how to navigate that and also bring people in who may be a little more hesitant or a little more shy or like don't want to speak up because they're afraid of harming people who, they already know have been harmed in many ways before. yeah, those are just a few of the ideas I've had.
Yeah, they're really great points. I mean, I think, for me, acknowledging people and receiving feedback, I think is important. I mean, recently I had a situation where I had to receive some feedback, and my first initial response was, I didn't think this feedback was very good, which was the wrong way to think about it completely. When the right way to think about it is just feedback. I just need to think about the feedback. But I had to go off and have a bit of a moment with myself, and just think about it. Hold on a second. How do I think about this feedback? And that's the point. It's neither good nor bad. It's what we do with it, I think, and that's the kind of theme, isn't it? And we have to be in a position where we can challenge what we think and what we value and what we acknowledge, so that we can embrace a more diverse way of thinking and behaving. I mean, if we don't do that, then we become more closed down. And I think to Gyles's point, the challenge is, it's going to require a lot of uncomfortable conversation. So people are going to have to get used to being uncomfortable, but it's not uncomfortable bad. It's uncomfortable. Actually, you've got to be able to recognize something and face up to something. If you truly want it to improve, you're going to have to, if you want to get better at anything, then you have to recognize where you are. You have to recognize what may not be working. And that kind of becomes something individualized as well, right? You have to look at yourself and think, actually, what can I do? And I think it's a challenge. There's so much that you guys have said that's so deep, and requires thinking and consideration. I mean, I could talk to you guys for hours and hours about this. I've got a few other questions to ask, but I do see a kind of a question from one of the attendees, which kind of comes on to one of the questions that I kind of prepared for you guys. So this is the question. I'm going to read it out. So I'm a very small shareholder of my family's company. I'm third, fourth generation, youngest member of the board, 55-ish. Someone that's slightly older than me. It's always a good thing, I like to say I'm a little bit younger. The board is all white, all male. Any mention of diversity is sniffed out. Or what advice could you give to how we can affect change? Especially when it comes to speaking to, they've put in kind of quotes, the older generation. It's a good question. Allison?
Sure. Yeah, this is a great question. I think definitely a tough one to navigate. Thank you for asking this. Few thoughts coming up for me. Number one, can you try to get to know a little bit more about what drives this board, like what their metrics of success might be, how they think about their what drives their decision making on the board and such. Can you appeal to those? Are there maybe, like, if they're interested in, again, not knowing the context of your company, but for example, if they're interested in market share or profits, can you maybe suggest that, like, hey, there's a whole market segment that we're missing because we're not considering these communities, and maybe one way to start thinking about how we might reach people who are different than us is by expanding who we consider to be experts. I found sometimes that on these types of boards, expertise and degrees and experience is kind of all very highly valued, but can we also start framing how does lived experience work into this? How might somebody's stories they tell about their lives and their communities inform how the company moves in the future? and how might you appeal to their sensibilities so that, you can start broaching this conversation without, maybe saying the word diversity. So like you said, you don't get sniffed at, quote unquote. Like how might you start thinking about, framing the conversation so that you're not immediately dismissed? What language could you use to kind of, meet them where they are?
That's really great answer as well, because to me, what you've just highlighted there is, when you think more collaboratively, not just about the organization, but the relationship it has with the customers it serves and the market that it's in, there is this bigger opportunity. There's this bigger opportunity to think about diversity without having to raise it as an idea. I think, that's absolutely, so that's something that I 100% agree with. What did you say? Plus 100. So, Gyles, what's your take on that? How would you talk to, or what advice would you give to a board from that perspective?
Yeah, so in my experience, not specifically on this topic, but in general, if I want to try and convince someone who's at such a great position of power in an organization where the buck stops with them and they can influence everybody below them, is to really understand what do they care about the most. So as much as they're human beings and they've got feelings, I think trying to appeal to their emotions doesn't work very well, because I feel it's very easy to become conditioned, and even necessary at times to be conditioned to just focus on the logic rather than the emotion. So to them, it's like, well, is this going to affect profit? Even more so, is it going to affect my paycheck? Right? Because one thing where staff, we're going to have some redundancies, but what happens to my bonus? Do I need to make a cut to salary? When stuff gets that deep, suddenly I find things start moving. And so can you prove that actually dealing with a diversity issue actually is going to impact income? Is this because of the loss of income from customers? So Disney, I don't know why it took them so long, but they finally was able to prove that they can get incredible amount of money from people of color if they actually have a black superhero. Don't know why it took them so many years, but they managed to eventually give themselves that evidence, right? And I'm glad they've done it because I love Black Panther. Anyway, so is it loss of customers? Is it loss of customers because actually you've shown yourself that you're behind on what could be either a fad or a genuine change in way of thinking on a topic? So like if you clearly are being against a particular community, whatever makes that community othered in some way, but you're really blatantly against them, in a very vile way, you're going to lose customers. You might gain some, but you're probably going to lose a lot, right? And I think there has been a drive for a lot of people to no longer be with Nike, with others actually still being on the side of Nike because of what they did with Kevin Kaepernick, with taking the knee. So are you behind the times? I think the other big one really is, are you even recognizing laws? Because there's times when you've somehow been able to just think it's okay, in a very simple one that a lot of us UXers can relate to. You've just not thought about making your website accessible to people who are blind. Like, this is an easy one to solve, but it can facilitate, so permeate throughout the business. Where are you actually trying to allow elderly people to feel welcome to use your digital product? And in so many ways we can see this coming up when it's about racial differences or LGBTQ plus sort of issues, where are we really trying to care about these people by following laws, including them by following laws? So when you start highlighting these things and like, we're going to lose money because of all of this potential income we could have got from these customers, or we're going to lose income because actually we've turned these people away, or we're going to get a massive fine, suddenly I find things move in the direction that you want them to. So that's what my advice would be, really. How is this issue going to financially impact the business? If you can prove that, suddenly people should be very receptive to your way of thinking and what you're suggesting.
Great. No, absolutely 100% agreed. you explain it in terms of the bottom line, and it can bring focus really quickly. And I think it kind of highlights the idea that we've got to try, various means to try to get people to think differently, because at the end of the day, we all benefit. I mean, again, the use of the word species. Everyone loves Black Panther. Everyone. Black Panther is just Wakanda Black Panther. I mean, the most technologically advanced society on the planet. How could you not like that? Do you know what I mean? Steve Jobs would love to live in Wakanda if he was alive. That's where he would live. Okay, so right. So we're going to come on to the kind of closing bits now. So I'd like a final thought from both of you. Yeah, just to wrap up. Let's start with you, Allison. Final thoughts on diversity and collaboration.
Sure. How to wrap this all up? I guess some high-level things that I think are crucial for fostering diversity, equity, inclusion, and collaboration include, for those of you who are designers or have some background in human-centered design thinking, like try out that approach to how you build collaborative moments, collaborative spaces, collaborative working groups. Consider, getting to know people at that level. Maybe try out interviews or diary studies or surveys, any of the methods that you might typically try, and then, conduct your experiments, design concepts with them, co-create, and then, try something out, iterate based on the feedback. I think another really crucial point to me is giving people time and space to be introspective about, how they show up in collaboration spaces, how they feel valued or not, and, giving them opportunities to say, hey, this is, something that you can do for me or for my colleague or for all of us to improve the collaboration environment or a particular moment for all of us. And then, how might we examine our biases, our privileges, our intentions even to collaboration, and use that sort of introspection and to inform both how team dynamics are today, and then inform a redesign of what could that look like in the future.
Great. I love the use of the word intentions there. Brilliant. Gyles, final thoughts, sir?
So for sure, we need to create environments where people can be free. People are often free when they feel like there's someone that they can relate to, whether it's obviously that they can relate to them, or they've been able to go on a journey with someone and be like, well, we're both humans, that's why I relate to you. That takes time, but it's fostering an environment where people can see that. And I think what's really supportive of that is when you take time to just think, well, what is it about this person that makes them a real asset to us in all different dimensions? What is it about any label that they could be walking with that makes them an asset, that brings something new to your environment, to your way of thinking, to the team's way of thinking, and not just first thing, well, what could be a liability about them? And also when you are feeling a little bit challenged, where it's like, I'm not sure what to say, I'm not sure what to do, or I don't fully agree with how someone is different, embrace that feeling of, oh, a little bit uncomfortable, and actually go on a journey of seeing why you feel that way. I'm a Christian, right? I don't need to go into much detail to say where certain things could be a challenge for me, right? Same with being a Black man that's been born and raised in the UK, but not born and raised actually in the Caribbean or in an African country. I'm used to the NHS where everyone can get access to healthcare. It's not completely equitable, but at the same time, there is opportunities to get access. And so I can be very challenged at times. I have been very challenged in times, especially talking about the topic of anti-racism, how there is even amongst Black people. So that if you are being challenged, just explore why you're being challenged, and perhaps expose yourself to those people that you are being challenged by, so you can learn and grow.
Great. Really, really, yeah, really great points. It takes courage to do that, but I think, we all need to basically demonstrate that courage now. But no, guys, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us.
Thank you, Simon, Allison, Gyles. That was a really, really good session. That hour flew by. I could genuinely listen to that for hours. Well, no, thanks. And that's that for Collaborate 2021. It's been a bit of a crazy 18 months, especially for those events. So I'd just like to say a massive thanks to Liam, Catherine, Lauren and Simon here at No Mensa, who are integral to the success of our events. And also a massive thanks to Emily for the amazing sketch notes over the week. We'll be back later in the year for Interact Global on the taking place between the 4th and 8th of October. Keep an eye out for updates on that. We will be revealing details very soon. Finally, thanks again to everyone that has spoken, watched, sponsored, or engaged with us this week. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. I think it's time for the pub. Thank you and goodbye.
See you later, guys.
Thank you.